Less than a week away is election night. Breaking it down hourly, today I will offer my most recent forecast for every state as their polls close on November 5th. Returning in the 2020 cycle, my last forecast accurately chose results in 49 of 50 states. Beginning at 7 o'clock at night Eastern Time, the polls close in 6 states. We start in Indiana and Kentucky. For former President Trump, these constitute solid states. In 2020, he carried Indiana 16 points and Kentucky 25. He should also carry South Carolina double-digitally, though not nearly as deep red as many other Deep South states. It voted for Trump by almost 12 percentage points in 2020 and hasn't gone blue since 1976. Regarding Vice President Harris, she will easily win Vermont, maybe the bluest state in the country. Our two surviving states, Georgia and Virginia, are both more competitive. Although Joe Biden won Virginia by 10 points in 2020, the race this year looks to be far closer. Polls showing Trump leading Biden in the real clear polling average revealed before he pulled out. Still underperforming relative to Biden's 2020 margin, she leads Trump by an average of almost 6 points across the past 5 polls now, with Harris as the nominee. 2 of these tests also show her leading just 2 points. Virginia is ultimately only a lean blue state on the map, downgraded from its expected status starting the cycle. Still, Harris would have to go terribly wrong for her to really lose Virginia. Now let us descend to Georgia with 16 electoral votes. One of the 7 main battleground states shown on the map is this one. Actually, it went for Biden in 2020 by just 0.2%, the narrowest margin of any state in that contest, and the first time Georgia had voted for a Democrat since 1992. An unusually high turnout among black voters, especially in and around Atlanta, one of the fastest growing and diversified cities in the nation that has drawn large numbers of young, college-educated, left-leaning voters from other parts of the country in search of employment, drove that win most of the way. But fast forward to 2024, and Trump has notably improved among black voters. Looking at the aggregated polling crosstabs, he is up almost 20 points with this demographic, compared to 2020. Given how close the 2020 race was, even if Harris only loses half these numbers among black voters, it would most likely prove lethal. Based on 56 polls taken since the beginning of the cycle, Trump maintains a lead of roughly 1.5 points in terms of present polling. That still very much falls within the margin of error. Thus, a normal polling miss could still turn the Harris vote opposite directions. Still, Georgia is among the more essentially Republican front lines. The issue of abortion isn't the calling card for Democrats here compared to the Rust Belt trio of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, or the Southwest battlefields like Arizona and Nevada, and the betting markets seem to reflect that generally more religious and thus socially conservative its voters are. On Pollmarket, Trump currently has a 73% chance of winning Georgia. Based on these patterns, I generally agree with them as I map Georgia in the Tilt Republican column. Election night at 7:30 Eastern Time will see voting ending in Ohio, West Virginia, and North Carolina. Beginning with West Virginia, among the most Republican states in the Union, is this one. Trump is a lock here since he won the last election by 40 points, and there is no indication of that changing this time around. Turning now to Ohio, once regarded as the perfect bellwether state, the party that prevailed there has been president in all except 3 elections since 1896. In the Trump era, though, it is trending hard to the right. In 2016, he carried it by 8 points. In 2020, he carried it again. That said, given Trump only leads Harris by 6.5 points right now in the poll average, there is some evidence to imply the Democrats bleeding in Ohio could stop here in 2024. The gains Republicans can achieve here and in larger Appalachia are just limited. Trump should still carry Ohio by a reasonable margin. Regarding North Carolina, our second of the 7 major battlefields. Though generally competitive, Democrats have not won a federal election here since 2008. Republicans have won the last 8 presidential and Senate contests, all by less than 6-point margins. Trump carried North Carolina in 2020 by just over a point. The latest decision desk average shows him leading precisely the same margin. Since May, 61 polls taken in the Tar Heel state have been published. Trump averages 48.8% over Harris's 47.5%. Once more, as we approach D-Day, we see the prediction market slanted in Trump's favor. His odds are exactly 73% like in Georgia. Though Democrats have also regularly underperformed polling in the final results over the last few cycles, all the data points to another Trump victory. I will keep giving Republicans the benefit of any doubt here, as it joins Georgia in the tilt Republican column, until I see that fundamentally different change. We now turn to the single biggest poll closing at 8 p.m. Let's start by Harris filling in the solid states. She will readily carry Maine's 1st congressional district, which Biden secured by 23 points in 2020. From there, she will keep ruling along the northeast coast, grabbing Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and of course Washington, D.C. She will also shine in Illinois. In 2020, every one of these states voted for Biden by at least 15 points. Harris will almost definitely carry Illinois and New York, where the polls close at 9 by double digits once all the votes are counted, even while we are seeing some indicators of eroding Democratic support in big blue cities like Chicago and in the New York metro area. Donald Trump ought to have no trouble keeping the solid southern states of Oklahoma, Missouri, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama in tow. Now, each of these states went for Trump by at least 15 points in the past election and haven't voted for a Democrat in 30 years. Now, turning to the more competitive races at this hour, beginning with Florida, there is a great likelihood that Trump would be called for the Sunshine State right away at 8 p.m. This is mostly due to most of Florida's counties closing their polls 1 hour earlier at 7 p.m., with just the Panhandle area voting until 8 p.m. The great majority of Floridians also vote either by mail or early in person before Election Day. This means that before 8 p.m. we probably have close to 80% of the vote counted, and it could be one of the first big states called on election nights, since Trump is expected to win Florida by a larger margin than any presidential candidate in past memory. Among only 5 states where Trump performed better from 2016 to 2020, Florida was one where his margin to 3.4% over Biden rose from just over 1 point against Clinton in 2016. Based on current 2024 polls, Trump leads by more than 6 points over Harris, so positioning him to attain the biggest margin for a presidential candidate in Florida since 1988. Here I lean Republican, but I'm trending toward the probably column. Turning now to Pennsylvania, the most significant state on the map, and the third of our 7 main battlefields. Pennsylvania, with its 19 electoral votes, is the state most likely to choose the winner. Nate Silver claims that this state doubles the likelihood of any other state and has a 30% chance of tipping the scales. Should Pennsylvania be carried, both Harris and Trump's chances of obtaining 270 electoral votes would soar to almost 90%. In 2016, Trump barely carried the Keystone State by 0.7%. But in 2020, Biden turned it back to the Democrats and won just slightly over a point. The polls for 2024 now indicate that we are headed towards still another razor-thin contest. Based on 89 polls right now, Trump leads by 0.4%. The race is quite erratic. Harris had led in the average during August and September. Stated differently, this represents as much of a toss-up as you could find in terms of polling. With their more optimistic view of Trump's prospects, the prediction markets project a 62% winning likelihood for him. I have Pennsylvania down for now as a toss-up, while I wait to see how the early vote patterns here over the next several days. We cannot make any significant judgments from the split since it currently quite reflects 20-20. If I had to tilt the race one way, I would most likely assign Trump a modest 51-49 advantage, but I will wait until my final estimate right before the election to make that definitive. Particularly with older working-class white voters, I do believe Harris will struggle generally to replicate Biden's special appeal in this larger Rust Belt region. And one finds it difficult to overlook the demographic trends. This section of the nation is drifting right. For 2020, Pennsylvania, for instance, voted almost 6 points to the right of the country, marking the second straight election in which the state leaned more Republican than the nation as a whole. It hadn't happened since 1948 prior to that. Conversely, Democratic candidates find New Hampshire and Maine far more friendly. Though they are usually more competitive, they generally follow the rest of the deep blue Northeast region. In 2020, New Hampshire voted for Biden by 7 points. He won Maine by 9. Trump would need a very favorable environment to turn either of these states, and both are probably headed for Harris at this point. Polymarket claims she has an 80% chance or better in both. That does leave Maine and Nebraska with competitive second congressional districts. Extremely rural and among the oldest and widest congressional districts in the nation is Maine 02. Trump won it by 7 points in 2020, hence it is probably Republican if he should once more support him by a rather comfortable margin. Conversely, Nebraska 0-2 is practically the complete reverse. Covering Omaha, it is almost entirely urban, and Biden carried it by 6.5 points in 2020. It will shift toward Harris on the electoral map and probably trend even further left here in 2024. Proceeding to the next poll closing at 8:30 p.m., the polls will close in just one state, Arkansas. Having supported Trump by 27 points in 2020, this is a definitely Republican state. At 9 p.m., our next major poll closing brings in the second biggest chunk of electoral votes for the evening, 162 in all. Polls close in important states, including Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Colorado, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan, plus New York, and a few less competitive states in the middle of the nation. I like to refer to this battlefield Central Time. Let's first list the safe Republican states. Along with its 1st and 3rd congressional districts, Kansas and Louisiana, Trump will readily carry North and South Dakota, Wyoming, Nebraska statewide. Regarding Iowa, it is precocious, on the brink of a safe Republican state. Like Ohio, it supported Barack Obama in 2008, and then once more in 2012 before turning sharply to Trump, who prevailed by 8 to 9 points in both 2016 and 2020. Until I find something to suggest differently, we haven't seen a Trump-Harris poll here. Thus, I will mark it in the safe Republican column. Regarding Kamala Harris, she is sure to bring New York, with her 28 electoral votes. In recent cycles, the Empire State has trended absolutely right. Going forward, it is expected to move under Trump here in 2024. Currently at 18.3% based on 9 polls, Harris still leads by a rather strong margin in the polls. Since 1988, Democrats have regularly carried New York by at least 10 points in every election. Hence, this should continue here. Harris also carries Colorado by a comfortable margin. Having backed Biden by 13.5 points in 2020, just 4 years after Colorado was regarded as a competitive battleground in 2016, it is the fastest left-trending state in the country. Let us now turn our attention once more to the Midwest, including Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan, the last 3 states in the vital Blue Wall region. From 1992 until 2016, when Trump broke through Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania into the Republican column, while coming within 2 points of flipping Minnesota over Clinton, these states voted blue alongside Pennsylvania in every single election cycle. Then in 2020, Biden turned Michigan back by 2.8%, Wisconsin by just 0.6%, and widened the Democratic margin in Minnesota to 7 points. Thus, Minnesota is essentially the most blue of the Upper Rust Belt quartet, with Michigan coming in second. Wisconsin is typically the most Republican-friendly. Using real clear polling, Minnesota's most recent polling average shows Harris leading by almost 4 points on average, another underperformance relative to Biden's 2020 margin, but sufficient to still tilt blue on the electoral map. Regarding Michigan and Wisconsin, Harris now finds both of these to be near must-win states. Without them, especially if she loses Pennsylvania, not to mention North Carolina and Georgia, her road to 270 electoral votes gets extremely tough. Based on 68 polls, Trump currently leads by a virtually exact margin, as the last 2 winning margins in Wisconsin, 0.7%. Over August and September, Harris had a 2 to 3 point advantage here on the trendline graph. In terms of polling, it seemed to be her strongest arena for a period. Now that title goes to Michigan, where Harris leads by another razor-thin margin of just 0.2%, drawing on 68 polls. Right now, the split runs Harris at 48.4% and Trump at 48.2%. Although Harris is still considered as the underdog against Trump with a 47% chance of winning, the betting markets also point to Michigan as Harris's best odds. That is better than Wisconsin, where she sits at 41%. Returning on my electoral map, Michigan appears as tilt blue for Harris. Undervaluing Trump in both 2016 and 2020, the Badger State suffered 2 biggest polling mistakes, underestimating Trump by almost 7 points against Clinton and by almost 8 points against Biden. With a demographic profile even more friendly to Republicans than a state like Nebraska, It also is the whitest and most rural of the three Rust Belt states. Should Trump outperform among white working-class voters, as he did in 2016, Wisconsin will probably be the front line for that movement. I have it slanted toward him. Trump leads with 204 electoral votes before we travel to the Southwest. Harris lags behind with 158. Quick status update here in the race to 270. Alrighty, let's go down to Texas, the second biggest prize on the map, with 40 electoral votes. Unless Democrats can stop the even more fast rightward trend down here in the Rio Grande Valley, and more generally among Hispanic voters in Texas, it's hard to see the party getting any closer to the fabled Blexus. Joe Biden received a higher share of the vote here in 2020 than any Democrat since Jimmy Carter carried Texas back in 1976. Based on the most recent poll average here, Trump actually leads by almost 8 points on average, a near 2.5-point increase over his margin from past. Texas is lean Republican, but right now it is trending more toward likely, just as Florida does. Slightly relatedly, New Mexico is the most Hispanic state in the country, thus maybe a sleeper swing state in next cycles as Hispanics trend right. For now, though, it is probably blue. 4 years after Biden carried New Mexico by 11 points, the polls show her leading by almost 8 points right now on average. At last, tying up the 9 o'clock closings in Arizona, the second closest state by margin, Biden prevailed by just 0.3% with 49.4% of Trump's 49.1%. Like in Georgia, Biden's triumph here was mostly resulting from Phoenix's fast expansion and diversification of its biggest population center. Thanks in great part to high turnout among minorities and college-educated voters, Biden became the first Democrat to carry Maricopa County in 80-plus years. Before Biden withdrew, Trump dominated the polls in 2024. He still leads Harris by about 2 points in the most recent polling average. Looking at prediction markets, Trump has the best odds among the 7 main battlegrounds, 74% of winning Arizona, superior still than North Carolina and Georgia. Arizona is a tilt Trump state on my electoral map, adding 11 electoral votes to his rising count and driving him up to 255. With 101 votes outstanding over the western half of the nation, Trump today sits just 15 shy of the magic number. Fast-forwarding to 10 o'clock on election night, polls closing in Montana, Utah, and Nevada will close. While Nevada is still our last battleground state, Trump is almost sure to win Montana and Utah. Though it doesn't weigh as much as the others with 6 electoral votes, it is still quite competitive. Though the country as a whole moved bluer between those elections, Biden carried Nevada by 2.4% in 2020, same as Hillary Clinton's margin from 2016. Indeed, 2020 was the first time Nevada voted to the right of the country since 2004. Republicans also reversed the governor's office in 2022 and got more U.S. House votes than Democrats for the first time in decades. Now in 2024, Biden stayed in the race, while no other state had changed more drastically to the right in polls. Trump led with 5 and scheduled a 2020 election. She quickly reversed most of those gains when Harris took over, even briefly leading Trump. But today, with 43 polls included into this average, Trump leads by roughly a point, at 48.1% to 47.2%. Still, the early votes in Nevada at this point define the keynote there. All things considered, Nevada's basic values should somewhat favor Harris. Nevada's rather low turnout compared to other swing states should have lessened the significance of the vice president's fundraising advantage and presumably better ground game. Nevada's proximity to her native California could also give her a little geographic boost. For these reasons, I would have slightly favored Harris in this coin flip contest. Still, for Democrats, the early vote here is quite poor. Usually a week away from Election Day, we would be discussing the size of the Democratic firewall here and whether Republicans have the will to overcome it on Election Day. Rather, among more than 700,000 votes cast, Republicans outvote Democrats by 5 points, already accounting for more than half the total ballots cast in 2020. Experts from Nevada are stunned. Other than Nevada now supporting Trump, there is no other way to explain it. With that, Trump is now expected to get 271 electoral votes, enough to guarantee a second non-consecutive presidency of the United States, even though Pennsylvania's 19 electoral votes are deemed as toss-up. All good now. We reach our penultimate poll closing at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 o'clock Pacific here. Polls closing in Idaho, Washington, Oregon, and California while Kamala Harris will sweep all the West Coast states, securing the Pacific Blue Wall for Democrats for the 9th consecutive cycle. Trump is sure to win Idaho. This covers her native California, with 54 electoral votes, the highest electoral prize on the map. Not much to discuss here. Trump has a 99% chance in Idaho per Pollmarket, while Harris is preferred at 98% in Washington, 96% in Oregon, and once more, 98% in California. That leaves us with just the non-contiguous states of Alaska and Hawaii, where the polls close Eastern Time midnight. Safely in Trump's column is Alaska. Although his 2020 margin of 10.1% was the closest in 30 years, there's no realistic situation whereby Harris flips Alaska. Though actually moving rightward more than any other state between 2016 and 2020, Hawaii presents a rather similar scenario. Biden still carried it by almost 30 points, thus Trump won't come close to winning there either. Thus, with that, Trump's final Electoral College projection comes out as 278 electoral votes, leading Harris with 243. Trump turns Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin back into the Republican column, all states he won back in 2016, while Kamala Harris clings to Michigan. Still, in every one of these battlegrounds, the race stays shockingly close, and either candidate could score more than 300 electoral votes. For this 2024 presidential election map, prediction, and analysis, that serves. Please leave a like on the video if you loved it as well. Kindly subscribe down below. View more of my channel's material here. As usual, thank you greatly for viewing. See me next time.